If I have seen further, Newton wrote, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants.
First stage propellant tanks have been pressurized. The engines will build up to a thrust of 7.6 million pounds. T-minus 30 seconds. We have a cutoff. We have a cutoff at T-minus 30 seconds. This cutoff was automatic, done by the sequencer.
Right now, today, the United States government has an open case file on a photograph over 50 years old. Taken in December of 1972 on the last manned mission to the moon. 3 points of light arranged in a triangle. Amateur researchers found it years ago. NASA never explained it. In 2024, under a declassification effort called Pursue, investigators pulled the original film and started looking again. No conclusion has been published. The file is still open. This is not a story about one photograph. This is 35 years of NASA's own astronauts, on the record, in their own voices, describing things they could not identify. February 1962. John Glenn becomes the first American to orbit the Earth. Over the Pacific at sunrise, he sees hundreds of small glowing particles drifting past the capsule like fireflies. NASA later traced them to ice and paint flecks shedding off the capsule. Case closed officially, but not everyone agreed.
Gordo, you expressed interest at one time in unidentified flying objects, the feeling that there might be something to all these stories. Do you still feel that way?
Well, I feel that there have been a large number of fairly well qualified, or exceptionally well qualified, I should say, people who have seen objects that have not had any really logical explanation other than this. I think that maybe, in fact, each and every one of them does have an explanation. But I think that there are so many possibilities, so many thousands of possibilities of other planets out somewhere in the universe that would have a livable atmosphere, that I would hate to rule out the possibility that maybe there are people or some type of human life on some of these. And if this is the case, then it's not too unfeasible to think that perhaps some of these objects might have been something of this type.
You don't think that the comparatively short step out into space that the Mercury flight will take you on is far enough out to make any observations in this area?
No, I think we're still at a fairly low order of getting out into space when you speak of space and being millions of miles involved. We're only getting out 100 miles or so.
What about the so-called Glenn effect, Gordo? The snowflakes, the fireflies. Now both Schirra and Carpenter seem to feel that it's frost of some nature off of the capsule, but apparently Glenn still sort of casts doubt on that theory.
The men who flew the missions couldn't agree on what they'd seen, and said so on live television. NASA's own scientists took Glenn's account seriously enough to sketch it out by hand, mapping exactly where above the horizon the haze layer sat, degree by degree, before they wrote it off. 3 months later, test pilot Joseph Walker takes the X-15 to 50 miles up, the edge of space. His onboard camera catches 5 or 6 objects moving through frame, never explained. 3 months after Glenn's flight, Scott Carpenter flew Aurora 7 and he went looking for Glenn's fireflies on purpose. Here he is on the actual recording at sunrise.
And now at 1 hour at this time, I now have 1 hour and 21 minutes, and I am observing John's fireflies drifting away from me. Sun is coming up behind me. I'm beginning to get the glow on the clouds. Fireflies appear to be white, very whitish, with almost a green like real fireflies. Clouds on the earth below are changing color, are getting quite light. And I am now on the day side. The sun is not yet quite up, and I am observing stars. The earth is light below me. The sun is still behind me. The sky looks dark above me, and I can see stars very distinctly.
Later in the same flight, he's tracking something else, a distinct object, not the drifting particle field.
It's light inside, it is below me. It's quite a brownish, it's reddish brown, and considerable altitude above the ground. Each time I fire a pitch down thruster, I get a shower of these little fireflies. It is flashing now, it is the light. It's quite bright, quite discernible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right. Appears to be about 10 to 12 miles away. I'm keeping it directly in the window. At the order of a second magnitude star now.
Then this Carpenter, working out loud, trying to identify what he's actually looking at.
It's fantastic. I suspect that the star I see is Arcturus. They're very interesting. It is neither. It is one of the white objects. So I have two stars that are staying quite still. The white object actually looked like it came toward me, but it wasn't. You can actually see the particle there playing off, as John described it as a lathe shaving. It's a very good description of it.
A few minutes later, something makes him stop mid-sentence.
My rates are now just about 0 in all three axes. As a result, I notice that these particles keep tending aft on me, relative to me, at any time. Getting a real burst of light in the window, and I really don't know what it is.
That line is on the record, in his own voice. I really don't know what it is. Ground control, meanwhile, is getting a second description of the same general field from Carpenter later in the flight.
I have some more of the white particles in view below the capsule. They appear to be traveling exactly my speed. There is one drifting off. It's going faster than I am, as a matter of fact.
Roger, understand.
I haven't seen the great numbers of these particles, but I've seen a few of them. Their motion is random. They look exactly like snowflakes to me.
So in one flight, a firefly field matching Glenn's, comparable to snow. A separate trackable object, bright enough to estimate against stellar magnitude, gone unexplained. And one sudden burst of light that the astronaut himself couldn't identify, on the spot in real time. One photograph from this period, a classic-looking domed saucer, got the full forensic treatment. NASA laid it side by side with a sketch of Carpenter's own sub-satellite balloon. Explained, an ejected tracking balloon that never fully inflated. This is what NASA's paperwork looks like when a case actually gets closed. Walter Schirra, flying Sigma 7, reports a blue streak and unusual airglow over the South Atlantic, a region already known for strange readings, thanks to a weak spot in Earth's magnetic field called the South Atlantic Anomaly. May 1963, the final Mercury flight. Gordon Cooper reports a glowing greenish object closing on his capsule. In Australia, the Machia tracking station logs a radar return in the same spot, at the time called real and solid. Skeptics have since argued it could be misidentified debris, but the original mission log recorded a genuine radar visual match. Two independent sources, same object, same moment. That's the pattern for the rest of this story. NASA's own instruments backing up NASA's own witnesses, and NASA never quite closing the file. 1965, NASA moves to the two-man Gemini missions. Longer flights, more time for the unexpected. June, James McDivitt spots a cylindrical object with what look like arms or antennas on a collision course. Investigators later matched it to the mission's own spent Titan booster tumbling nearby. Explained, but only after the fact through careful orbital tracking. In the moment, neither astronaut knew what he was looking at. Ed White, on the same flight, separately reported his own unexplained sparkles through the window. 2 months later, Gordon Cooper, now on his second flight, and co-pilot Pete Conrad described debris drifting past their windows. Snow-like particles, glittering pieces catching the sunlight, logged, unresolved, filed away under a cover sheet that stayed classified for 8 more years. December 4th, 1965, 4 hours and 24 minutes into the flight of Gemini 7. Here is that transmission, start to finish, exactly as it happened.
Gemini 7 here, you listen on your 8.
Loud and clear. 7, go ahead.
Bogey at 10 o'clock high.
This is Houston. Say again, 7.
So we have a Bogey at 10 o'clock high.
Roger. Gemini 7, is that the booster or is that an actual sighting?
What?
Say again, 7.
So we have several, looks like 3 up there, actual sighting.
You have any more information, estimate distance or size?
We also have the booster inside.
Understand you also have the booster in sight, Roger.
And we have very, very many, it looks like hundreds of little particles going by to the left out about 3 to 4 miles.
Understand you have many small particles going by on the left. At what distance?
4 miles. Looks like perhaps a vehicle that's disintegrated.
Roger, understand they're about 3 to 4 miles away.
They're past now, they're going to pull a little bit.
Roger, and understand they were about 3 to 4 miles away.
Try the pier line, or further.
Roger. Gemini 7, Houston, were these particles in addition to the booster and the bogey at 10 o'clock high? Roger.
7, this is, Houston, this is 7.
Go ahead.
I have the booster on my side as a brilliant body of the sun against a black background, and with billions of particles around it.
Roger, what direction is it from you?
It's about at my 2 o'clock position.
Does that mean it's ahead of you?
It's affirmative. Ahead of us at 2 o'clock, slowly doubling.
Roger.
Gemini Control here again. The reference in that conversation to the third unidentified object, of course, the third object was the Bogey. There were several references to the Bogey. This is the unidentified object, in addition to particles which appear to be headed in a polar orbit, you heard Frank Borman say, plus Jim Lovell discussing the booster. It was Borman who reported sighting the Bogey. This is Gemini Control Houston at 4 hours, 24 minutes into the flight.
The mission control announcer came back on the line minutes later to clarify the record. In his own words, the third and unidentified object referenced in that conversation was in fact a separate bogey, with several references to it throughout the flight. 3 separate things on the record in the same 90 seconds: the booster, hundreds of particles, and a bogey, a third unidentified object that mission control itself confirmed was distinct from the other 2. Somewhere inside NASA, someone wrote 4 words on a note and filed it away. It sat there, unpublicized, for decades. By the end of the Gemini program, NASA had a pattern, trained pilots on the record, describing objects and lights they couldn't identify. Sometimes confirmed by radar, sometimes confirmed by a second astronaut on the same call, almost never fully explained. If a mission commander calling an actual sighting on live radio is new to you, that's the whole point of this channel. We go straight to the primary source, not the retelling. Hit subscribe now, because what NASA logged next, on the moon itself, is stranger than anything you just heard.
That's 15 seconds. Guidance is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0. All engine running. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward drift.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And you're cleared for takeoff.
1969, one day out from Earth, Buzz Aldrin reports an object keeping pace with the spacecraft. The crew's best guess, their own S-4B rocket stage, still nearby after separation. A reasonable guess, offered in the moment, not a confirmed identification. Later, in a darkened cabin, the crew starts reporting flashes of light, visible with their eyes closed. We'll come back to this exact phenomenon because NASA eventually studied it in real detail. On the return trip home, a bright light and a mission transcript line most people have never heard. The language logged at the time, tentatively ascribed to a possible laser. Not a star, not a satellite, a laser. That's what the first crew to walk on the moon wrote down on their way home. November 1969, Apollo 12, here's lunar module pilot Alan Bean, on the recording using the spacecraft's onboard telescope. Bean. When you look out the AOT in the dark quadrant, you can see these lights, particles of light, flashes of light. They're just sailing off in space. I was thinking they're dropping from my water boiler, but it looks like some of those things are escaping the moon. They really haul out of here and just press off at the stars. Later in the same mission, Commander Pete Conrad radios in about a separate observation. Conrad: "Hey, Houston, it looks like our tracking lights burned out. On the first night side pass, we had little bits and pieces floating along with us, and we could tell the tracking light was flashing on them. And we still have, I've presumed to think, bits and pieces floating along, and nothing's flashing on them. So I'm pretty sure it burned out." Mission Control checked their own telemetry and told him the electrical data showed the light was still on. Conrad had just turned it off seconds before. A small human moment of two systems disagreeing, resolved calmly, on the spot, by the astronaut himself. Not every sighting in this story ends in mystery. But the surface photographs from this mission, later flagged, annotated, and re-examined, still show multiple unexplained points of light near the lunar horizon. 5 in one frame alone. The highlight boxes you're seeing were added afterward by investigators for reference only. They are not and never claimed to be a conclusion. April 1972, Apollo 16. A crew member watching the horizon from orbit in a darkened cabin catches a single instantaneous flash of white light distinctly below the horizon, not a star rising into view. Back on the ground, mission scientists are audibly excited on the recording, calling it, on tape, the first report of a transient event of this specific kind, and immediately working to correlate the timing against their own instrument data.
I'd like to turn to one observation reported from orbit that has interested us a great deal, and that was the flash that was reported. I haven't seen, I understand the transcript hasn't yet been typed.
I haven't seen it yet, so that's my only hope for pinning down the time. If you get it to about 5 minutes with that, I think.
If you can help us pin down the time and roughly the location, and we'll certainly look at our records, and that would be an important piece of data if we recorded that. I would like to ask, was this a colored flash or a white flash?
It was white.
How does it differ from the kind of thing you get with a cosmic ray impact on your brain?
I didn't see any of those.
He didn't see any of those.
I see.
Redhead.
There weren't cosmic flashes.
Well, we're very much excited by that. As far as I know, it's the first report of a transient event of some nature that's been seen from orbit.
I just have to wait for I should have written it down, and it just didn't occur to me to write it down.
Did we get a time on it at all, Ken? Or
it's on the DSC.
It's on the DSC, yeah.
If I ever get that, I'll...
Well, then we would correlate any information we get from the seismic interfaces.
Yeah, how about its persistence? Did it just...
No, it was just a flash, and the way I happened to notice it, I was looking at a horizon that was showing up from solar corona or zodiacal light, whatever you want to call it, in that region. It was very shortly after we lost the signal from Earth, and I was watching stars pop up over the horizon, and got this flash, which was in size was about, I wasn't looking directly at it at the time it happened down in the side of my vision, but it was brighter than the brightest star that I had in the field of view at the time, and I had the feeling that it was in physical or angular size, it was equivalent to the size of the larger stars.
This was not the well-known light flash phenomenon other missions had already started reporting. We're about to get to that, and it's a very different thing. This one, NASA's own scientists treated as something new.
If I have seen further, Newton wrote, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants.
First stage propellant tanks have been pressurized. The engines will build up to a thrust of 7.6 million pounds. T-minus 30 seconds. We have a cutoff. We have a cutoff at T-minus 30 seconds. This cutoff was automatic, done by the sequencer.
December 1972, the last Apollo mission to the moon, and the richest set of sightings in the whole program. What follows is the actual mission transcript, condensed but verbatim.
A few very bright particles or fragments or something that go drifting by as we maneuver.
Roger, understand.
Just 3.5 hours after launch, the crew starts maneuvering the spacecraft. Command Module pilot Ron Evans keys his mic first.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of big ones on my window there. Just bright. Looks like the 4th of July out Ron's window.
Lunar Module pilot Jack Schmidt looking out his own window.
Yeah, now you can see some of them in shape. They're very jagged, angular fragments that are tumbling.
Houston asks if they might be some kind of fluid venting from the spacecraft.
Roger, they look like fluid of some sort?
Not to me, they look like pieces of something.
Roger.
They're very bright.
Jack, we'd like Omni Charlie.
Bob, for the most part, these fragments are not, are tumbling at a very slow rate. I've tried a couple pictures of them, different settings. You may get an idea of what at least the patterns look like.
Roger, I got you. We're all ears on these fragments. Do you think you can figure out what they might be?
Well, you know, I don't know. There are a number of possibilities. If you had some kind of a... I got the impression maybe they were curved a little bit, as if they might be off the side of the S4B. That's a wild guess.
Okay, RCS logic is...
ice jumps, possibly. Maybe there's paint coming off of it.
Evans is direct. Their own words, a wild guess. Not a confirmed identification, an honest on-the-record theory, offered because it was the best one they had. 2 days later, Commander Gene Cernan described something different. Not particles this time, but a flash that had been with him since the first night of the flight. Cernan. There was a very bright spot that flashed right between my eyes, like a very bright headlight, like a train coming at you, only with a flash. I did see them there, and they impressed me. I will say one thing, though. No question in my mind, but that they're there. Later the same day, Cernan spots something that isn't a flash at all, a distant object he can triangulate against nearby particles for depth. Cernan. It is a bright object, and it's obviously rotating because it's flashing. It's way out in the distance. It's up at about 11 o'clock, maybe 10 or 12 Earth diameters. I don't know whether that does you any good, but there is something out there. Houston takes this seriously enough to work out spacecraft attitude data and try to pin down the object's exact position. Cernan gives them a precise fix, pitch angle, a mark as it crosses the window frame, a full readout. Cernan. One unique thing about it, Bob, is that it's got two flashes. As it comes around, in rhythmic fashion, you get a very bright flash and then a dull flash. And then it'll come around with a bright flash and then a dull flash. Schmidt offers an identification for this one, the side of the S4B stage catching sunlight, with the engine bell producing the dimmer secondary flash. Later in the mission, Cernan reports 2 more. Cernan. We got 2 of those flashes out there. They could be SLA panels. I don't know. They're alike in intensity and pretty regular, widely separated. One is about the position we called the first time. The other one is far to the left. 2 objects, one theory offered, and left as a theory, not a certainty, by the man who saw them. 3 days later, on the lunar surface itself, Schmidt keys his mic one more time. Schmidt. Hey, I just saw a flash on the lunar surface. It was just out there north of Grimaldi. You might see if you got anything on your seismometers, although a small impact probably would give a fair amount of visible light. It was a bright little flash right out there near that crater. Houston asked him to mark the exact spot on a map. No impact was confirmed on the seismometers. No cause was ever identified. It stays exactly where Schmidt left it, unresolved. Here's where NASA does something most people never hear about. Remember those flashes Schmidt and his crewmates mentioned seeing with their eyes closed in a dark cabin? NASA didn't wave that away either. They sat astronauts down for detailed technical debriefs about it, sometimes reported by more than one crew member at the exact same moment.
The first question we got is the streaks that you saw. Were they a very sharp phenomenon, or were they rather diffuse, like fuzzy?
Ones I saw were very sharp. There was no mistaking what it was. It was a streak so long, instantaneously disappeared.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Both the single streak and the double shot appeared to be very clear to me.
They were quite clear, and I think I made the comment over the loop that most of my streaks appeared to be on the periphery. And for the first several days, I got the impression that this direction was predominant. Later on, it appeared that I don't think I could get that good a pattern, but that was my first impression for the first couple of days.
The next question is, was there any apparent direction of propagation? And could you tell it was coming from one side to the other, or was it just a flash?
Several times you did say from the left to the right or something like that.
Tried to correlate it, but in my case, I couldn't really correlate a pattern out of it.
Yeah, I would think that the time period in which we tried to report them streak by streak, flash by flash, was representative. And it was my feeling that it was generally random during that time period, and therefore generally random throughout the times that we were noticing them.
No, I meant, could you detect that it was moving from one side to the other in general?
Yes.
It was moving in
a specific
flash.
A
specific flash, yes. Yes.
But you could see it as a travel from one side to the other? You really
I think we tried to report it that way, didn't we?
Yes, you did report it.
That's the way
that's what's puzzling us, because it happens, it has to be very fast, you know.
Isn't that question kind of redundant then?
I don't believe you.
Was there some character to these flashes that had some aspect of direction? I mean, were they all the same rod-shaped, or did they have a tail on them?
Well, what I saw, what I reported as a streak was simply that. Now, maybe the way we determined the direction subconsciously was that it was a ball of light moving in a direction, leaving a tail. But I can't say that for sure. All I reported was a streak, and I had the impression of it moving from one direction to the other. And I reported that direction, and I can't clarify it much more than that.
Maybe while you're asking a question, if we just douse the lights, I think they can see this in the darkened room. Let's just try it. The idea is to try to see whether this is what you saw or similar to it.
I think you need the lights out there.
Well, can you see anything?
Yeah, except that's what it looked like, except it was traveling. In other words, it started out and it definitely progressed across field of view.
Direction of motion per individual.
Was it that bright?
Yeah, except you're not traveling. It was traveling.
You saw it as a point that made a streak.
I never did see two simultaneously either.
Neither did I.
Now, you have two streaks on that. I never saw that.
At one time you said you saw a semicolon-shaped thing.
Most of my streaks appeared to be on the periphery, and for the first several days I got the impression that this direction was predominant. Later on it appeared that I don't think I could get that good a pattern, but that was my first impression for the first couple of days.
The next question is, was there any apparent direction of propagation? And could you tell it was coming from one side to the other, or was it just a flash?
Several times you did say from the left to the right or something like that.
Tried to correlate it, but in my case I couldn't really correlate a pattern out of it.
Yeah, I would think that the time period in which we tried to report them streak by streak, flash by flash, was representative. And it was my feeling that it was generally random during that time period, and therefore generally random throughout the time that we were noticing them.
No, I meant, could you detect that it was moving from one side to the other in general?
Yes.
It was moving in
A specific
Oh,
flash.
a specific flash, yes.
But you could see it as a travel from one side to the other?
Yes.
You
I
really
think we tried to report it that way, didn't we?
Yes, you did report it. That's the way it was puzzling. It's because it happens. It has to be very fast, you know.
Isn't that question kind of redundant then?
Don't believe you.
Was there some character to these flashes that had some aspect of direction? I mean, were they all the same rod-shaped, or did they have a tail on them?
Well, what I reported as a streak was simply that. Now, maybe the way we determined the direction subconsciously was that it was a ball of light moving in a direction, leaving a tail. But I can't say that for sure. All I reported was a streak, and I had the impression of it moving from one direction to the other. And I reported that direction, and I can't clarify it much more than that.
Maybe while you're asking a question, we just douse the lights. I think they can see this in the darkened room, but just try. The idea is to try to see whether this is what you saw or similar to it.
I think you need the lights out there.
Well, can you see anything?
Yeah, except that's what it looked like, except it was traveling. In other words, it started out and it definitely progressed across the field of view.
Direction of motion per individual.
Was it that bright?
Yeah, except you're not traveling. It was traveling.
You saw it as a point that made a streak.
I never did see two simultaneously either.
Neither did I.
Now, you have two streaks on that. I never saw that.
At one time you said you saw a semicolon-shaped thing.
Saw what?
A semicolon-shaped object. This was in the first report. Before the
I never did.
If I reported it, that's what I saw, but I don't remember it.
Did you see anything that looked like this?
All I can say is whatever was reported is what I saw.
No, we discussed the various shapes prior to flight, and I concentrated pretty hard on trying to see the shapes, and I think as I reported, it was either a streak and just a rather simple streak, or it was a flash and rather a simple flash. Nothing too exotic about it, and on a more rare one would be maybe just a pinpoint of light for an instant, rather than get the idea of a flash. So it would just be a pinpoint for a second and it would be gone. But that was more rare than the other two.
By a flash, you mean a distributed sort of thing?
Yeah, I meant like watching an explosion. Just a ball versus just a steady dot. Yes.
Was it like this at all? Can you see that?
No.
Can you see this one?
Can't see it.
We're not getting any light.
I don't think it's lighting.
Oh, there was something just as you turned it there.
Okay, I can see
I
that.
mean, multiple,
Well, this one.
Okay, that to me would be the pinpoint that I'm describing. The eruption, or the nova as we call them, would be more of an explosion.
Yeah.
How about this?
Yeah.
Were there more dots than that?
Well, you've got a very, very bright center and a diffused edge. I would say that the impression I had was you would have an area like that indicating a blow up, but the center wasn't predominantly that bright. But that's getting closer to what we would call, or what I would refer to as a nova or a flash.
It's not as bright as what I call a nova, yeah.
Ed, was your nova an explosion like this, or a discrete bright flash?
No, it was, what I called a nova was more of a blob that seemed to start with that and kind of expand.
more diffused.
Yeah, and more diffused as the time went on.
But brighter than that?
Brighter than that, yes. That's about what I'd call a flash or a star.
Here again, you've got too much contrast between the center and the diffused area there, though.
That's some light.
Also, your time frame that you're flashing, that's too long. It was faster than that.
But am I right, Ed, from what you just said, that when you said flash, you really meant a star and not what you just described?
I think I almost tended to use flash and star interchangeably.
That's not true for you.
No, when I flash, nova to me were essentially the same thing. The only distinction I make is the pinpoint versus an explosion.
Okay, I think what Stu was calling a pinpoint was about what I'd call a star or a flash. And a nova, to me, was a much bigger, brighter thing.
Okay, I got a couple of quick ones. First of all, the cabin lighting. Exactly, was it completely dark, or were there some instrument lights still on?
Absolutely dark.
Absolutely dark. Okay.
Wait a minute.
Well, yeah, there is.
You're talking about the time period that we ran this quantitative report, right?
Right.
So, completely dark.
Okay. And did you have your eyes closed most of the time, or were they open in the dark cabin?
Mine was
we had
closed.
both.
Yeah,
I had both.
even though we had the window shades on, when we'd roll around so the sun would hit some of the windows, there'd be some light seepage around, and we were aware of that ahead of time. So that during that time period, at least I made an attempt to keep my eyes closed, open otherwise, and of course we closed our eyes when Ed flipped his flashlight on. But generally speaking, eyes were open.
No, mine was almost closed all the time. I was floating down the corner of the LEB, but I kept my eyes closed because I didn't know when we might roll into the sun, and I didn't want to pick up any light at all.
Okay, the next question on the flashlight was when you shined it in your eyes, what was the approximate duration in each eye? About how many seconds?
Well, I just kind of moved it across for 5 seconds or so. 5 or 6 seconds. It hurt. It was very bright.
And next question on still your orientation in the LEB. You said you were looking toward plus X. Were you across?
I was generally, you know how you have the three couches, and plus X is I was oriented this way with my head looking face up down in this corner.
So your head was in the same direction as it would be if you were on the couch, it just rotated 90 degrees.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. And the next question is, in almost every case, you did report that it was in one eye or the other. I believe there's one incident where you had both eyes. And my question is, it may be somewhat redundant, but were you absolutely certain that you could distinguish that it was one eye as opposed to...
Yeah, I felt I was getting more in the left than the right for some reason.
Well, in fact, you're all heavily biased towards the right on your reports.
Really?
Very heavily, like 3 or 4 to 1.
I would have sworn that I was biased to the left.
You had 12 right and 6 left, and Al, you had 10 right, 4 left, and of the ones you reported, Stu, you had 6 right and 2 left, and the rest were either no reports or both eyes. It was all very heavily biased to the right eye.
That's very surprising.
No, well, you know.
While we're talking about that, it seems to me that I would get a flash or a streak or whatever the phenomenon, whatever the shape was, simultaneous with somebody else reporting.
That's exactly the next question. We there were three, from listening to the tapes, three events, and it occurred in cases where different pairs were involved, which were coincidences, where I think in one case, Ed, you said flash, and then Al, you said simultaneous with him, I had a flash in the whole right eye. Now, my question would be, when it was simultaneous, was it after he began speaking, or was it in fact, was his words good enough for you to have been a mark on your flash?
Well, certainly within a fraction of a second, I think it was simultaneous.
Yeah, the couple of times it happened to me, it was his mark, or whoever's mark it was good enough.
Okay.
Same here.
And then the next question is, earlier, before the session, and when you were describing some of the subjective observation, you mentioned the halos that you'd seen. That you'd see a flash followed by...
and we finally got Stu to take his halo off and put it away. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Well, okay. Now the after effects, were they present most of the time? Did you have cognizance of a spike and then a sort of a glow afterwards?
Only on what I call the nova or the supernova.
Is that true for you too, Stu?
I didn't really notice a halo effect myself.
I guess I'm not sure what we're calling the halo effect. You mean a diffused brightness?
More like an afterglow.
Did I call any of those? I sure don't remember it.
No, I think Ed described it.
Yeah, I don't think I saw any of those.
Okay. And the other question we had was, do you remember making any observations in lunar orbit? I know there were no formal periods, but any just informal.
You know, I thought about that on the way back, and I was so tired that night that I really don't remember seeing any flashes, but I didn't look for any either. So I guess the question would be, I consciously did not see any, but I wouldn't take that as a data point.
Okay, that's fine. And then the final question that I have is, after our formal session, that was at about 191 GET, you then had a sleep period later on. Do you remember whether you saw any during that sleep period closer in?
It's significant whether you're inside the magnetopole or not.
I don't consciously recall, but I don't really recall that there was any night, except on the lunar surface, that I didn't, at some time or another, see some.
You didn't see any on the lunar surface?
I don't remember about the lunar surface. There was precious little sleep that night anyhow.
Sure. So. Okay, well, that's all the questions I had.
We douse the lights for a minute.
While you're dousing light, I have one additional question. Did you get the impression that light flashes could have been within the cabin or definitely within your eye?
Definitely within the eye.
Okay.
I want to get some idea about orientation and length of the streaks. Did you ever see anything that looked like this?
No, I never did.
You use the terminology of 6 o'clock or hours of the clock. Does that mean to you, when you say 6 o'clock to the center, about how long a streak is that? That's a hard question to answer. If you were visualizing something about about the arm's length away from you, how long would you say your longest streak was? That long? You see my fingers? I'll show it on the...
Let me describe it a different way. It appeared to me that the things, I would say, were 3 or 4 inches away from my plane, whatever that means, and were a couple of inches long.
Tell us what it means.
That makes sense. Yeah, a couple inches long and 3 or 4 inches in front of you. It looked like this.
Too long for me.
There were 2 of them, I guess. See that one up above?
The one up above looks better.
Okay. How about this?
Probably fairly close.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably about as close as the longest one.
See, I'm not sure what our scale is here. I'd rather say that if I'd consider whatever it may be, but the field of view of, say, my right eye, and take a radius of that, I'd put a streak at of about a half the radius would be the average streak.
Half or a little longer.
Okay. You think, is there any way that you can associate this length of streak to what you said, Stu? Was it longer or shorter, or can you say?
Well, it would depend on how big a circle I want to draw from my field of view. I saw streaks that long because with my eyes closed, I imagine a rather big field of view here in my eye. So I'd see streaks that long.
One time you said you saw streaks oriented in a certain direction. Do you remember that? Which
yes.
Direction?
The way you had it, bring it on up that way.
And Ed, what about you?
Well, I think I had them from several directions, and I reported them as moving from one direction to the other at that time. There were several of them, though.
How about Al? Any particular direction, up and down, left and right?
I didn't notice any preferred orientation, and here again, I think it try to express the length of the arc of the flash in terms of the peripheral field. And if you're talking about a horizontal peripheral field as being somewhere in the vicinity of 150 to 160 degrees, then in some cases the light flashes would go across as much as 50 or 60 degrees of that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Were the light flashes broken in the center?
In some cases they were. In some cases I had the feeling it was two dots, one immediately following the other, giving the impression of right to left or top to bottom or bottom to top or left to right.
The point is, you see that the retina is so curved that if you draw a straight line, you can't get too long. You shouldn't be able to get too long a streak without breaking out of the retina again. You know, in the plane of the retina, because it's shaped like that.
But it has some depth, does it not?
Yeah, if it had been any longer than that, if it just is on the retina.
Can't hear that.
Through a couple of portions.
Can't hear you.
It should not have been any longer than what I showed you if it just went through the retina as one track. But if it went through a couple of eyes, then you'd have the impression of a long streak. That's why we're interested in the character. I have one more about the cloud that you saw. This is a new phenomenon which we hadn't expected. Can you describe this lightning behind the cloud?
I think it occurred, I reported it a couple of times, and it appeared, as I recall, to be down low on one eye or the other, and it was just a diffuse lighting.
Any color?
White, silver.
If you were out in the country and looking at the horizon and there was lightning behind a cloud, was it like that?
Except generally if you do that, you can see a streak behind the cloud. There was no streak, it was just a diffuse lighting.
Simulator can look at that. We have a little gizmo that will simulate that sort of phosphene when you get out of quarantine. Maybe have a look at it.
I have one last attempt to try to do the cloud here. If you douse the lights a minute. Good show. It's still wet. Was it anything like that?
I didn't see it.
It's pretty dim cloud, all right?
I am not dark adapted, I still don't see it.
I haven't seen anything on it yet.
Okay, well, forget it.
Okay.
But what you're trying to describe is just what we used to call heat lightning as a kid.
This is a general diffuse light.
Yeah.
You didn't see the relief of the cloud, did you?
No, not necessarily, no. It's just a blob of light.
The one final question, we did voice up to your question about whether you noticed any other sensations besides flashes, which was the reason for asking that was that if it was, did you feel any tingling or find yourself twitching or hear anything? And the reason for that is that if it is an interaction back in the brain, then your other senses are just about as sensitive as your visual sense, and maybe you should feel something, but you never noticed that.
Didn't notice it.
Didn't notice any sensation.
There's two things to think about. Did you notice your thumb itching or your lips twitching?
In particular.
No. Never looked for it either.
Well, it's, these are suggestive questions, and the fact that you say no is significant.
The questions get remarkably specific. Was it a streak or a flash? Did it have a direction, a color? One astronaut describes something he calls a nova, a small blob of light that seems to expand. Another compares the feeling to heat lightning behind a cloud. This is what a fully explained mystery sounds like. NASA had a name for it: the light flash phenomenon, cosmic rays, high-energy particles from deep space, passing straight through an astronaut's eye and triggering the visual system, even with the eyes shut. Documented, studied for years, using this exact instrument called ALF-MED. We're spending this much time on it for a reason. It's the control group. This is what NASA looks like when it fully solves something: the debriefs, the instruments, the follow-up questions, the answer. Now hold that up against Grimaldi Crater, against the Apollo 16 flash, against the triangle sitting in the corner of a frame from this same mission. Those cases got the sighting. They never got the debrief that closes the file. The sightings didn't end with the moon landings. They moved to America's first space station. Skylab crews across 1973 and 1974 keep logging the same kinds of things: light flashes with eyes closed, the same studied phenomenon. A reddish object tracked for several minutes, moving independently of the station, most likely a satellite in a similar orbit, though never formally confirmed. Flashing lights outside one crew's window, moving on their own, separate from the station itself. Before we go further, it's worth pausing here, because NASA's own congressional file doesn't hide its explained cases. It puts them right next to the unexplained ones. A mysterious bullseye object, photographed by Gemini 6 astronauts in December 1965, turns out to be an out-of-focus, nose-on photo of the approaching Gemini 7 spacecraft. Right next to it, a diagram of the Saturn booster and its 4 jettisoned adapter panels. The same panels Cernan himself identified in Act 3, shown here from NASA's own engineering side. This page goes further than a caption. It's a full forensic breakdown, an artist's rendering of the rendezvous evaluation pod jettisoned during Gemini 5, next to Scott Carpenter's own 1962 sub-satellite balloon photo, the one later claimed to show a classical domed UFO. NASA lays the actual blown-up Gemini 5 photo of the pod right underneath, showing how glare and graininess alone can turn a known piece of hardware into a blob. Real photos, real engineers at Cape Kennedy prepping the pod, side by side with the misidentification. This blown-up Gemini 11 photograph, once flagged as a possible UFO, is demonstrated here as simple lens glare off the Proton 3 satellite. This one, 2 objects drifting from an open hatch during Gemini 12, is annotated plainly as debris and paper. A UFO, reported from Skylab 2, turns out to be a Brazilian airstrip seen from an angle that fooled the eye from orbit. The same page carries NASA's own explanation for the X-15 sightings, not a fleet of UFOs at 30 feet, but flecks of ice off the liquid oxygen tanks. The same firefly effect Glenn and Carpenter reported, just on an unmanned rocket plane instead of a capsule. A wide-angle shot of ordinary debris scattering after Saturn booster separation, filed for comparison, precisely so investigators wouldn't mistake routine hardware for something new. Here's where this same government file gets more pointed, and where we need to be exact about what it actually says. This document doesn't just debunk photographs, It runs a full rebuttal against astronaut UFO, quotes that had been circulating in UFO literature, starting with a widely repeated line. John Young says the odds are that unidentified flying objects do exist. The file's own author points out that a newspaper reporter wrote that as a lead sentence in 1973, and none of Young's actual quoted words said any such thing. Then it prints the astronaut's own denials on the record, one after another. John Glenn: I never have personally seen anything I could identify as a UFO. Gus Grissom and John Young, jointly: we have never seen any UFOs. Buzz Aldrin, asked directly about a UFO cover-up conspiracy: that's a lot of hogwash. Alan Bean, on his own mission: at no time did we see anything which was not of our spacecraft. This is the same document, the same file, arguing directly against the pattern this episode has spent 30 minutes building. That's worth sitting with, not skating past. NASA's own paperwork contains its strongest sightings, its clearest explanations, and its own astronauts pushing back hard on being cited as UFO witnesses at all. All three in the same folder. This is the same government file that leaves Grimaldi Crater open, the same file that calls the Apollo 16 flash unprecedented. NASA clearly knows how to close a case when the evidence supports it. That makes the cases it doesn't close carry more weight, not less. Now, a 23-year gap in this story. Then, November 1996, Space Shuttle mission STS-80. Astronauts aboard Columbia photographed something in 3 consecutive frames. Frame 1, an unidentified object near the center of the shot, off to the side of Earth's curve. Frame 2, the same object rotated, tumbled on its own axis, consistent with something free-floating, drifting on its own. Frame 3, it's changed position again, passing between the shuttle and the Earth below. 3 real photographs, a documented sequence, never identified. 1997, a viewer watching NASA's live public feed reports a light rising from Earth, making a sharp 90-degree turn. NASA cuts the external camera almost immediately. No raw footage of the moment has ever been released. By 1998, this pattern had reached Washington. Members of Congress formally asked NASA in writing about astronaut UFO sightings. NASA's answer: on the official record, the agency does not actively investigate UFOs. 36 years of astronauts, trained pilots, scientists, engineers, reporting objects on radar, on film, on live radio, in their own voices. And the agency's own position to Congress was that it simply wasn't investigating any of it. Back where we started, December 1972, 3 points of light in a triangle in the corner of a photograph that sat in NASA's own archive for over 50 years. By now you've heard the arc in NASA's own words. Glenn's fireflies explained. Cooper's glowing object backed by radar, never fully resolved. Borman's bogey, confirmed as a distinct third object by mission control itself. Aldrin's laser, beam watching particles escaping the moon. The Apollo 16 flash, NASA's own scientists called unprecedented. Cernan naming his own SLA panels, right next to Schmidt's Grimaldi flash, which he marked on a map and never got an answer for. And now this, The one case in this timeline that isn't a 50-year-old cold file. Investigators have the original film in hand right now. Preliminary government analysis suggests the feature in this photograph may be a physical object, not a conclusion, not a dismissal. An open investigation, active today. The real pattern isn't that NASA has no answers. It's that NASA has answered some of these carefully, with instruments and debriefs and named phenomena, and left just as many exactly where the astronauts left them. "35 years, 9 missions, astronauts who put their names on the record, describing things they could not identify, sometimes backed by radar, sometimes by a second witness on the same channel, sometimes by nothing but their own careful word choice, tentatively ascribed. An actual sighting, the first report of a transient event of some nature. If this is the kind of investigation you want more of, full case files, primary sources, no filler, subscribe to Night Shift Chronicles now, because the Apollo 17 file is still open, and when NASA's own analysis comes back, we'll be the ones breaking it down line by line. And NASA isn't the only agency with a file. Next, we go into the CIA's own declassified UAP records. All 5 tranches, released under the same pursue effort that reopened the Apollo 17 case you just saw. Different agency, different chain of custody, and, as you're about to find out, a very different set of secrets. The record doesn't lie. It just doesn't always finish the sentence. Until next time, stay awake, stay curious, and stay informed.